its push for the extradition from Spain of an accidentally pardoned paedophile. Also, work on Tunisia's constitution is held up amidst its political crisis, and there's warnings of food shortages in Namibia as it faces its worst drought in 30 years. First, though, judges say that a convicted paedophile arrested on Monday is considered a flight risk and will remain in custody in Spain, whilst authorities consider an extradition request by Morocco. The kingdom wants Daniel Galvan back in one of its prisons after he returned to Spain following the reception of a pardon from King Mohammed VI. Now, that was revoked after it sparked angry protests in Rabat last Friday. The mix-up's been rather embarrassing for the palace. It said Galvan's name was mistakenly included on a list of Spanish prisoners Madrid wanted pardoned. Spain, though, saying that it never asked for the release of any inmates. Well, Jean-Benoit Manez works with the UN's child rights body UNICEF in Morocco. He tells us that the outrage over Galvan's release could serve as a warning.
I think it can indeed be seen as a warning for 4 reasons. First, when the case started, the offender was actually in a Moroccan jail. He had been judged and condemned according to Moroccan law, which of course prohibits sexual violence against children. Then, when the king took unprecedented decision to cancel the pardon, he did so insisting on his role as a protector for children. In addition, the spontaneous mobilization of civil society, social networks, and media also demonstrate that social violence against children will not be tolerated anymore in Moroccan society. Finally, the fact that Mr. Vina is in jail in Spain also reminds potential sexual offenders that extraterritorial laws exist in Europe and actually in the US that will somehow enable the state to prosecute and judge sexual offenders even when they are back at home for crimes committed abroad against children. So if there's any positive side to this story, it is indeed that it can serve as a warning to potential sexual offenders.
And you're satisfied with the kind of progress that you've seen in terms of the way that authorities tackle this particular crime?
Well, more can always be done, and UNICEF is here to help. But indeed, authorities since more or less 12 years have taken a lot of steps. The penal code has been reformed. There has been a national action plan for children. A lot of advocacy activities supported by UNICEF often towards judges and policemen to ensure especially that children victims of violence are not considered as offenders themselves. It still exists. There's a progressive recognition of the role of NGOs, which is fundamental in identifying and responding to this kind of situation. And finally, the Moroccan government, with the support of UNICEF, is putting together an integrated policy towards child protection. So definitively more is to be done, but local authorities at all levels are aware. And I would like to say that the support of civil society and society itself is indispensable for any successful fight against sexual violence against children.
Jean-Benoit Manez now speaking to us from Morocco. Now, the Assembly putting together Tunisia's post-revolutionary constitution on Tuesday suspended its work, saying that it would stop until the government and the opposition start negotiations. Secular leaders have been calling for the government to quit and the Constituent Assembly to be dissolved ever since the assassination in July of liberal politician Mohamed Morsi. More protests were planned for Tuesday night to mark the 6 months since another secular figure, Chokri Belaid, was assassinated earlier this year. Now, the head of the ruling Islamist party says that though it is open to dialogue, demands for the government to step down go against the country's democratic ambitions.
The opposition has gone too far in its demands, and I think they are now seeing what they can do to back down. They are the counter-revolution. Our protests are in the path of the revolution. Theirs are against it. We exported the revolution to Egypt, and they imported from Egypt the coup.
Police in Burundi stopped a rebel leader from speaking to a crowd of supporters who arrived to welcome him as he emerged from 3 years of hiding in the bush. Agathon Rwasa resurfaced on Tuesday and first tried to address a rally in Bujumbura before police said that he did not have the authorization to hold the gathering. Rwasa once headed up a guerrilla force that has since become the National Liberation Front political party. He fled contested elections back in 2010, but says that he's now ready to challenge President Pierre Nkurunziza in elections in 2 years' time. Top US senators were in Cairo to address the country's political crisis and have, for the first time, referred to the overthrow of President Mohammed Morsi last month as a coup. This is something the country's new leaders strongly deny. Republicans Lindsey Graham and John McCain urged the military to release political prisoners and start a dialogue to speed up the return to democratic rule. Reflecting Washington's anxiety about events, Graham said that the people who are in charge were not elected and that status quo was unacceptable. However, the US says it will not be cutting off the $1.3 billion in military aid it currently supplies Egypt. In Congo, Brazzaville, the former deputy chief of the National Security Council is amongst a group of soldiers who faced trial Tuesday over a fatal blast in the capital. The 23 defendants are charged with arson and harming state security in connection to a blast that left 300 people dead last year. The explosion at the Impila munitions dump flattened hundreds of houses in the capital, leaving thousands injured and about 17,000 homeless. Kenyan troops in the Somali port city of Kismayo, as part of an African Union peacekeeping force, say they're ready to hand control back to the Somali government. Nairobi says it will pull out of the port, but warned that unless this is properly handled, this could allow the return of al-Shabaab militants peacekeepers chased out last September. Meanwhile, Tuesday marks exactly 2 years since the al-Qaeda-linked group was forced to abandon the Somali capital of Mogadishu. Though the peacekeeping mission remains and there has been an improvement to security, insurgents have recently ramped up sporadic but sometimes deadly attacks. For more on Mogadishu's progress over the last 2 years, I'm joined by Bronwyn Bruton from the African Center at Washington's Atlantic Council. Bronwyn, thanks for speaking to us. Now, has AMISOM, the African Union's mission out in Somalia, rather overstated the case in saying that it was responsible for expelling al-Shabaab 2 years ago?
You know, I think it has, quite honestly. AMISOM was deployed to Mogadishu in 2007 with only a few thousand troops, and they were there, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, in increasingly large numbers. And when al-Shabaab left Mogadishu in August of 2011, it wasn't in the aftermath of a great battle. They weren't driven out of the city, as you would often think, listening to the way that it's described in the press. They actually shouldered their weapons and walked out, and they shocked everyone when they did it because it was completely unexpected. It was really a tactical withdrawal on their part. It was not that AMISOM was so strong that they simply couldn't stay any longer.
So regardless of the reasons as to why they left, they have left, and Mogadishu is now undoubtedly a much safer place.
Mogadishu is certainly a safer place. There's no doubt about that. And I do think the African Union deserves a great deal of credit for sticking it out as long as they have and for learning a great deal on the job when they were there. I think the question going forward, for me at least, is has AMISOM, the African Union peacekeeping mission as it's known, have they actually outstayed their welcome at this point? I'm heartened by the decision to withdraw Kenyan forces from Kismayo because Kenya's apparent annexation of that town has caused great political conflict in the country. But I also think that there's a concern now about so many foreign soldiers being on Somali soil at a time when, as you've noticed, most Somalis seem to think that the situation is getting much better. Somalia has such a long history of antipathy towards foreign forces being in the country that I think, in a sense, we're playing with fire by turning AMISOM into a perpetual mission.
Bronwyn Bruton there from the Africa Center at Washington's Atlantic Council. Thanks very much for speaking to us. Now, the most vulnerable members of communities in Namibia facing the worst drought in a generation are struggling to find enough to eat. It's already sub-Saharan Africa's driest country, and a state of emergency was declared earlier this year after the widespread failure of crops. Nicholas Germain has more.
This land in northern Namibia used to be vegetable farming fields. Now it's just sand. Sub-Saharan Africa's driest country is suffering its worst drought in 30 years. Karia Makuju can no longer grow maize here, and she has just 1 week's worth of supply remaining.
We are hungry. That is the impact of the drought. That is what we can see. People are hungry. People are dying.
The elderly say this year the drought is particularly harsh.
Before, we never suffered from drought because we used to drink milk and eat whatever we wanted to. Now the drought is really affecting us.
Namibia's 13 regions have all been affected by drought, and UNICEF says more than 100,000 children are at risk of malnutrition.
29% of children in this country are stunted, and stunting is irreversible. It means 29% of these children do not do well in schools. It means 29% of these children actually fall out of the system.
The lack of grazing also means many farmers are forced to sell their cattle. In all, according to the UN, an estimated 780,000 Namibians, or a third of the population, are now facing food insecurity.
That wraps up African news from me for now, but I will be back tomorrow with more.
All right, thanks very much indeed, Georgia Calvert-Smith there with all the Africa news. Stay tuned to France 24. Get all the latest international news coming up, as well as sports headlines and our Focus section.